I couldn't help but smile when I saw this one because I've always loved stories about people slowly losing their sanity. Our story begins with a girl named Haruka who lives with her mom, dad, and younger brother Ren in a townhouse in Kyoto. But before we get to the good stuff, allow me to set the scene for our story. I don't want to disappoint, so let's begin. It all began when Haruka's family moved into their new home, and as she was helping her father move boxes into the attic, she noticed something quite peculiar. In the far corner of the room sat a sliding door that had been sealed shut with a large padlock. What made the door strange was that it didn't look like it led anywhere. It wasn't attached to a closet or any furniture. It just kind of hung there, staring at them awkwardly. Haruka asked her father what was behind the door, but he looked at it as if it were a long forgotten memory, shrugged and said he had no idea. Haruka decided that if her dad didn't know what was behind it, then she would. But she knew that prying into her parents' past wasn't something she should do. So she sealed the door back up and went about her business. But she couldn't stop thinking about the door. Every time she walked by, she'd peer through the keyhole, but it only revealed more padlock. A few days passed and Haruka started hearing strange noises coming from the attic late at night. She'd wake up from a nightmare and swear she could hear fingernails scraping against wood, scratching around and around in circles. She tried to convince herself that it was just mice, but the sounds were too rhythmic, too purposeful. Something was definitely up there with her, and she was desperate to find out what. One evening, her mom and dad left early for a friend's anniversary party. It was just her and her little brother, and she could hear the scratching starting up again. Curiosity got the better of her, and she went to investigate. It took a lot of effort, but she finally managed to pry the door open. She looked inside and gasped. It was the weirdest thing she'd ever seen. The room was tiny, maybe just big enough to fit a person, but it had no windows and the door was the only way in. The walls were covered with hundreds of swirls and spirals, each one scratched deep into the plaster. The spirals seemed to twist and turn forever, going round and round until they disappeared into the darkness. They seemed to stare back at her, mocking her, beckoning her to come closer. And as she stood there staring at them, she felt something strange. The spirals seemed to pull her eyes toward the center of the room. She felt dizzy and disoriented and panicked. She was afraid she might fall into the spirals. She shut the door quickly, glad to be safe on the other side. That night she dreamt of being twisted. She dreamt of her arms and legs coiling tighter and tighter, becoming smaller and smaller until she collapsed into a spiral of flesh. When she woke up, she felt drained and confused. Had she really seen those spirals in her dream, or was she imagining things? Either way, she knew she had to get back to that room. She needed to figure out what those spirals meant. As the days passed, Haruka found herself drawn to the attic more and more often. She'd sit in the dark, tracing the lines of the spirals, trying to decipher their meaning. And every night she dreamt of being pulled deeper and deeper into the spiral, until she was nothing but a tightly coiled ball of nerves. One evening, she was sitting in her room writing in her notebook when she looked down at the paper and realized that the spirals were there again, etched into the pages as if by magic. She stared at them in disbelief, knowing that she hadn't drawn them. She rushed to the bathroom to stare at her reflection in the mirror, but when she turned around, she found the spirals on the back of the mirror, staring back at her accusingly. Over the next few days, the spirals appeared everywhere. They were on her bedroom walls and on the windows. They were in the steam rising from her rice bowl. She even saw them in the condensation forming on her breath. She didn't know what to do. She didn't know how to make them stop. And then one night, Haruka's brother Ren caught her in the attic. He found her standing in front of the spiral door, gouging her own fingernails into her arm, making circles and more circles and more circles. She looked up at him with glazed eyes and a faint smile on her lips and whispered, "The spiral has no end." Then she went back to what she was doing, lost in her own world of pain and spirals. Ren was horrified. He wanted to help his sister, but he didn't know how. He tried talking to her, but she didn't seem to hear him. He tried touching her, but she lashed out at him, her eyes wild with fear and anger. He ran out of the room, not knowing what else to do. The next morning, Haruka woke up and stumbled out of bed. She looked around her room, expecting to see the spirals everywhere, but they were gone. She cautiously approached the attic door, half expecting it to be flung open, but it was sealed tight. She turned the knob and pushed the door open, revealing the spiral room. Except it was empty. The spirals were still there, but they no longer seemed to mock her or beckon her closer. They seemed sad somehow, lonely. Haruka stepped into the room and closed the door behind her. Ren heard the door click shut, and he froze. He wanted to call out to his sister, but he knew it wouldn't do any good. He listened intently and heard faint scratching coming from above, circling, circling, circling. He ran to the attic, but it was empty. All he could hear was the scratching, getting louder and more frantic, as if whoever or whatever was trapped inside was trying to claw its way out. Then just as suddenly as it started, it stopped. There was silence. Ren sat down on the floor, tears streaming down his face. He didn't know where his sister had gone, but he knew that she wasn't coming back. He hugged his knees to his chest and cried for her, for the sister he no longer had. Okay, let's talk about this one. Obviously, we can't know for sure what happened here, which is part of what makes this story so scary. But I think there are a few possibilities. I think that there was something trapped in that room, some kind of entity that fed off of Haruka's fear and anxiety. And the spirals are a kind of trap, a way to keep it contained. When Haruka first found the room, the scratching had already started, which means that whatever was in there was already awake. It was waiting for someone to come and set it free. And when Haruka opened the door, she unleashed it. That's why the spirals on the walls are so important. They're a way to contain the creature, to keep it from spreading its madness to the outside world. By drawing the spirals, Haruka was feeding the creature, giving it more power, and the more power it gained, the more dangerous it became. Eventually, it consumed her entirely, twisting her mind until she was nothing but a hollow shell of her former self. Once the creature had fully consumed Haruka, it was free to roam the world, infecting others and spreading its madness everywhere. Alternatively, I also wonder if Haruka was always like this, if the scratching and the spirals were just figments of her imagination. If that's the case, then the story becomes a tragedy, a story of a young girl who was lost to her own demons. Either way, it's a scary thought, the idea that there are things in our world that we can't see or understand, that there are forces beyond our comprehension that are just waiting for us to let our guard down. Anyway, that's my take on this story. What do you think happened? Let me know in the comments below. Also, if you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button. It helps me a lot. Anyway, thanks for watching. Take care and I'll see you next time.